data logged of us almost completing the roguelike video. They've left us with no ability to rift into other universes.
The council. Great! The council found us again. What now?
It is also fairly difficult to tell how long the barrier has been active, since it seems to also reset my internal clock.
Well, if there's a chance we've been here for a while, wouldn't you think they would have, come to arrest us? Or even off us by now? I'm assuming you've seen this before? Right. Yeah. Right. Again, I'm sorry about that. The future. Wait a minute. Call me stupid, but I have an idea.
You are stupid.
No, I meant after you hear my idea. And at least think about whether it is good or not. So, before this whole thing started, we were talking about the current state of roguelikes, and even my favorites in the present. What if we talked about the future of roguelikes with new and upcoming games? Wait, come on. Did you even consider how this might help?
As far-fetched as her idea is, we only have 15 minutes before we reset. It wouldn't hurt to try anything we come up with, especially since we've come to the conclusion that they are only looking to keep us in one space.
See? Zaya thinks this may work.
I do not. I only believe that our chances of breaking free will be increased if we attempt any ideas as they come up.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's fair. Alright, perfect. Everyone's on board. We should be ready to start when the reset happens, so we have as much time as we possibly can.
There's just one issue.
And that is?
How are we to remember this conversation and our plans when the reset occurs?
Huh. Before, we talked about the current state of the roguelike genre, as well as catching up with the updates to two of my favorite games in said genre. This time around, I'd like to talk about two newer titles to hit the scene. So, let's start off by taking a look at one of the biggest games to enter the genre in 2022. Cult of the Lamb. I briefly talked about Cult of the Lamb in my top 10 games of 2022 video, but I didn't delve too deep into talking about the game, so let's finally jump into it. For the uninitiated, Cult of the Lamb is an action RPG roguelike with base management at the core of its systems. That was developed by Massive Monster and published by Devolver Digital. As I had mentioned before, it was the roguelike of 2022, generating so much hype that it was also the most wishlisted game of Steam Next Fest June of that year. Cult of the Lamb was even nominated for Best Indie Game at the Game Awards that year, but it did receive several other nominations and awards at other Game Awards ceremonies. It's even received pretty good reviews from users and reviewers across the board. So, what did this game do to get all this praise and attention from fans and review outlets alike? Well, aside from one of the best run game Twitter accounts I've ever seen, the game pulls you in with its cute and charming art and keeps you around with its rather engaging gameplay loop. Cult of the Lamb has you assume control of, well, the lamb, as you build up a cult in the name of the One Who Waits, a powerful being who saved you from being executed by the four bishops of the Old Faith, also known as the False Prophets. With the power of the One Who Waits, you are not just tasked with creating a cult to grant you more power, but are tasked with using all your newfound strength to find and defeat each of the False Prophets. But to do so, you again need to build up your following. You'll make sure your followers have food and shelter and are sanitary and happy, so they'll perform the tasks you give them. You'll need them to grant you worship points to level up your cults and unlock new structures and features of the base management side of the game, as well as experience to unlock new weapons, upgrades, and traits for your expeditions out to defeat the False Prophets. Your cults will dictate how difficult or easy your time will be. In fact, you can't access certain areas without a certain amount of followers, and since they can rebel, get sick, or even die, you have to make sure everything is running smoothly to be able to truly make any progress. You live and die by your cults, as base management is at the core of the game. It's very dynamic, but doesn't get too difficult to manage until later on in the game, when the false prophets can cause curses to happen, you start running out of materials. Since the game is actively getting more difficult, dying during your expeditions, which becomes more of a reality as you progress. Hell, the more people you have does mean more power, but it also means you now need more resources to accommodate them. There was one time when I had ventured out and gotten 4 new followers, only to come back and realize that some of the old beds were broken and I didn't have enough resources to make beds for all the new followers and fix the old ones. I had also died at one boss and returned to have one of my followers start rebelling against me. It generally made things difficult as he continued to lower the faith of my other followers, so I had to give him the big timeout until he calmed down. And don't get me started on when one of my followers died and hadn't unlocked the grave sites just yet. Yeah, things can get out of hand fast if you let it. The followers also have some depth to them, with their own unique stats and traits that can make them better at doing one thing over another, making you actually consider which jobs some followers should have, especially since there's a limited amount of spots available for certain jobs. You can even give them gifts to help build up faith and occasionally improve their stats. They'll even come up to you with different requests, and fulfilling them can grant you some bonus faith and even some extra bonus, like a new follower, but denying them can also harm your faith with them. So depending on the request, you may think about if it's worth accepting it or not, because sometimes fulfilling a request will still have unwanted consequences. Followers will even level up over time, granting you a large bonus of faith as well as a doctrine tablet fragment that you'll in turn get to introduce doctrine for your cult once you collect 3 of them. These doctrines fall under about 5 separate categories, each of which have 5 doctrines placed in them. Whenever you select a category, you'll be given a choice between 2 different doctrines to put in place, both of which are tied to the same subject but go about doing things in different ways. And when it comes to unlocking things, you get to choose what buildings and expedition upgrades you want and what order you want, as it is a branching tree. And speaking of expeditions, let's go ahead and take a look at those since, it's the other half of the game. You'll start each expedition or run with a randomly assigned weapon and curse. You'll then go forward into a randomly generated set of areas to gather resources, slay enemies, and ultimately defeat the bishop of that specific realm. You are able to safely end the expedition before fighting the bishop, so if you feel you won't be able to defeat it, we're just going out to get more resources, or if you're pretty banged up when getting up to this point, you can just head back and not risk the loss of your spoils from that run, and worse, the faith of your followers. For if your faith gets too low, you'll risk losing followers, and sometimes they'll threaten to leave in a mass exodus if you don't do something about it. So it'd be best to put on your best traditional garbs and start doing rituals to get your faith back up if this does happen. Going back to your expeditions, you will discover tarot cards from this fellow here during your runs. Tarot cards act as temporary upgrades during your run, and they range from something as simple as increased damage to giving you a dodge roll with a hitbox that hurts enemies. Aside from this though, you'll get to experience different events depending on the path on the map you take, such as the ability to rescue a new follower, an event that grants a single follower bonus loyalty, resource deposits, shops, and etc. Overall, expeditions are fairly straightforward, but lack the variety one may expect from a roguelike. But at least you'll get away from the hectic nature that is your cult, right? Well, while you are gone, your cult doesn't stop functioning. They get hungry, they work, and they sleep. The cult continues on as if you were there, meaning if you spend too much time away, you may come back to a mess that requires your attention. And aside from your expeditions, you actually do have a real reason to be gone, as there are locations you'll be allowed to visit to interact with a colorful cast of characters, and you'll actually want to do this as you unlock new shops, new followers, decor, rituals, and more. Hell, there's fishing over here. The NPCs you get to interact with will also give you side quests that when you complete them will give you a shard, that upon collecting 4 of them will allow you to unlock a new cloak. These cloaks grant different perks for your expedition, and my personal favorite is the one that grants you a random set of tarot cards at the start of one, but you won't be able to discover any more for the rest of the expedition. Now, with the game's great visuals, slamming soundtrack, and honestly engaging gameplay loop, there's very little this game does poorly, but that does mean there are a few areas where it does falter. Although the gameplay loop is fun and engaging, especially when you're still progressing through it, once you complete it, you're just going to be tending to your cult and making things run smoothly. There isn't much endgame content. For roguelikes, the endgame is simply doing more runs at higher difficulties, challenges, modifiers, and what have you. But Cult of the Lamb doesn't have any of this once the final boss has been slain. You'll just be doing the exact same things you were doing before, repeating content without much real reward or progress. It's just cult management from there. For example, in the last video, we talked about the endgame content and Have a Nice Death, and the breakdown difficulties, and how they modify the game to give enough difficulty and challenge for you to keep playing, but Cult of the Lamb doesn't have anything like this currently. Unfortunately, Cult of the Lamb doesn't have much variety when it comes to its gameplay, or the endgame content to keep you playing once the credits roll. But this will most likely be addressed in the next major update that the developers have confirmed will have a slew of content, endgame content, and overall just reasons to pick the game back up again. I can safely recommend this game to all those who are interested, especially with that update coming out sometime this year. But if Cult of the Lamb doesn't seem like your speed, then let's speed things up real quick. A fast-paced, cyberpunk-themed movement shooter roguelike? Sign me up! This early access roguelike developed by Grubby Entertainment, titled Deadlink, places you in control of a bioshell as you run through simulation tests of the government's newest Deadlink program. You are, well, just a brain or consciousness being kept alive in a machine designed to give you control of a bioshell that is intended to essentially give a no-life risk approach to taking care of threats. But before the government officials can give this project the 100% go-ahead, you will be the guinea pig or first subject to conduct simulations to test the effectiveness of this project. So, what are you going to be doing with this bioshell? Taking out megacorp grunts, augmented soldiers, and tanks in the most fast-paced, action-packed, badass ways possible. With department heads Rumiko Usagi and Thomas Crusher, as well as the game's newest NPC, Maria Argentina, you'll be guided through the process of becoming that badass super soldier you were literally created to be. You'll get to choose between one of two classes, 3 once you unlock them, that each has its own primary, starting secondary, and kit of abilities, plus grenades to utilize during your runs. First class is the soldier, who has a shotgun primary, a rocket launcher secondary, grappling hook, and a directional stun ability. The second class is the hunter. He uses a magnum primary, an arc launcher secondary, a cloaking ability, and a position swap ability. The third and newest class is the engineer. He uses a rifle primary, a grenade launcher secondary, a small auto turret, and a hacking tether that incapacitates enemies. Each class carries a fairly unique feeling playstyle, and with the ability to have your secondary changed while in the middle of the run, as well as bioshell upgrades, you'll be able to switch things up quite a bit. Personally, I find Soldier to be the most fun class for one simple reason: movement. The grappling hook is so much fun to use, as you zip your way to enemies or across the map or away from enemies by tethering to these secondary ammo granting destructibles called C-balls. I do think Hunter is the best class if you can hit headshots consistently, as your DPS will be unmatched, as well as the ability to slink away out of pretty much any situation. But I think it's the least fun class of them all. I clearly have a bias here, and although Hunter can do some crazy cool shit and is again really good, I really don't care about what's best. You may find the Hunter fun, but I'll stick with my Chad Soldier and Engineer. Now let's talk about the actual gameplay loop. You'll get started by choosing your class, and you'll get to select a randomly generated set of upgrades from this robot at the start of the run if you so choose. I love this little goober.
Warning, decompression imminent.
I'll miss that little goober. Then you go from arena to arena, completing the assigned objective, which ranges from destroying the corrupted C-balls, surviving for a set amount of time, defeating an elite, or just, turning everyone in the room to red paste. Now, although you'll get to paint these neon streets in red, you'll need to make sure you're making the best of the marking mechanic. Marked enemies, on death, will drop shields to replenish yours, as the only way to get more shields is really only by doing this, and the most consistent way of marking enemies is with your grenades. Not only are they good for a little bit of AoE damage, but they will also mark any enemies hit, making them primed to get some of that sweet shield essence from them. And you'll need to be sure you're doing this quite consistently, so you don't find yourself staring down a game over screen. And don't blow yourself up either. This can happen, and it will be embarrassing for all of us. When completing an arena, you'll be given a choice of stat upgrades, and most of the time a choice of implants you can acquire or get an upgrade to one of your current ones. These implants can be assigned to a specific ability, but each ability can only hold a certain amount of implants, as well as only certain types of implants. Allow me to explain. This implant here has an icon of a battery with 2 slots filled, meaning that my abilities that have 2 or higher are able to equip them, and this applies to all implants except for passive only implants that can be applied on any ability. When the the implant is then placed on a set ability, its effect in turn will be activated whenever you perform the ability it was set to. So not only do you have to consider what implants you want, you have to consider if your abilities have enough juice for them and which ability it will work best for you and your build. For example, this implant that resets a dash charge, I tend to like to equip to my weapon swap when I'm playing soldier. I'll be swapping weapons quite often, meaning I'll almost always have a dash to use. The implant system is honestly quite interesting and allows for player expression and experimentation. There are a lot of times you get an implant and there's just an obvious choice for where it would go, but there's plenty more that have you genuinely thinking about where you'd want them to be, especially since each class has their own limits when it comes to implants. Now aside from the implants, you'll also have the chance to get weapon mods and bioshell upgrades during your runs. They'll appear as arena completion awards that you'll get to choose from. Bioshell upgrades typically upgrade or augment your class abilities, and weapon mods will grant you upgrades to your weapons such as elemental properties, increased reload speeds, firing patterns, and etc. There are honestly a lot of possibilities and variety when it comes to the things you'll get for your runs, especially if you choose to get a new secondary weapon, but I tend to pass this up if I'm playing soldier, as a soldier is just the
perfect class.
Alright, I'm done talking about how Chad this class is. Now, there are only 3 areas in the game at this point in time, each with its own respective boss and themes. The first stage, the beautiful neon streets of the city as you take on a giant mobile spider tank in a shipping yard. The second stage, the stingy labs of a strange laboratory as you go toe to toe with a heavily augmented sealed soldier. And the third and final stage had you traverse through the cramped hallways of a factory where you'll take on a massive sentient AI with a god complex. Each of the bosses also have some difficulty to them, to varying degrees, and I personally struggle the most against the second boss. So you've completed a full run? Congrats! Give those higher difficulties a shot. And don't worry, with the XP and tokens you earn during that run, you'll be able to get permanent upgrades for each class, as well as general upgrades to help give you an edge out there in your next simulation. The Deadlink upgrades act as the permanent progression for the game, making you stronger overall with higher ammo capacities, more shields granted at the end of a room, re-rolls for implants, and more. The gameplay and gameplay loop of Deadlink is fun, challenging, and engaging, but since the game is currently in early access, you may find yourself longing for more content, especially once you unlock everything, which won't take you too long if you're consistently playing the game. The extra challenge in a neuromancy difficulty provides a lot of real challenge, but for some, there might not be enough content here to satiate you, but there is still the groundwork for a fantastic entry into the roguelike space, and overall, Deadlink easily makes itself a solid entry into the genre, and I can't wait to see what other bits of content the team over at Grubby is cooking up. Now let's start. Alrighty, the Lunasis video is finally done and dusted. What's up next on the schedule?
You have a new roguelike video to do.
Oh yeah, the one covering the updates for Have a Nice Death and Deflector.
Correct. Shall I pull up your script for the video?
Yeah, go ahead. Huh? They what? Huh. So, what games did I talk about? Well, of course that didn't work. Cult of the Lamb came out last year and Deadlink entered early access last year too. Those games are technically not the future.
I don't believe it had anything to do with the fact that you talked about games that are technically from the past.
How come? That sounds like it'd work, and I know the perfect game to do this with.
I don't think we should waste any more time.
Spiritfall is an upcoming 2D platform brawler of a roguelike being developed by Gentle Giant that takes its inspiration from the platform fighter subgenre. It's a game that I've been following for some time now during its development, when I accidentally found it when doing research for the original roguelike video I had done. I joined their Discord server, and from there began taking part in the game's playtests, easily finding another banger of a roguelike that has found itself on my top list. It genuinely feels like something I had never quite played before in the roguelike space, yet it feels familiar as I have a lot of experience in the platform fighter subgenre, and I'm sure this title will easily grab the attention of many. Spiritfall actually releases into early access today, and thanks to Gentle Giants, I was given the ability to play this game early as a part of their early creator access program, and I'm incredibly grateful. I'll also say that although I was given a copy of the game, it has not influenced my opinions of it whatsoever, and I'll be as impartial as I usually am. Now, let's go ahead and start breaking this game down. The story of the game has you take control of the perennial flame as it has chosen a new but questionable vessel to inhabit, making you now the Omen Forge. With a mask granted you by the divine spirits, the protectors of the realm, you are sent forth into the breach to unseal the gate that is limiting their power by any means necessary. With the aid of the temple caretakers and the divine spirits themselves, as they provide you with weapons, upgrades, and etc., you'll venture forth into the brink to unseal the gates and restore power to the divine spirits. Along the way, you'll meet those who are corrupted and looking to stop you from going forth, but with the blessing of the divine spirits, you'll take on their power to defeat all those who stand in your way. The story is rather straightforward, but with the dialogue of some of the bosses you encounter, as well as their codex entries, it's clear there is more than meets the eye to this surface level explanation that you'll be provided by the game, and I'm curious as to how things will unfold as the game's story continues to develop. In terms of gameplay, Spiritfall attempts to blend the gameplay of platform fighters with roguelike elements, and I can safely say that they succeeded. The game feels great to control, and feels even better once you unlock and start to get the hang of the other movement abilities from the divine spirits. I will say that I'm not the biggest fan of locking some of the movement abilities behind upgrades, such as wave dashing / wave landing and dash jumping, but I can say it doesn't negatively affect the gameplay when you initially don't have access to these abilities. In fact, you honestly don't even need to use them, as I've only recently started trying to implement some of their movements into my gameplay, sometimes to my detriment, but I like going fast so it's okay. When it comes to the game's combat, those platform fighter influences can still be felt here as well, as you'll be using directional based light and heavy attacks to pummel your enemies in a series of combos, sometimes barely even giving them a chance to fight back. And at this moment, you'll have 3 different weapons to choose from, each with its own unique light and heavy attacks, and even its own unique temporary upgrades. Those weapons are the Battlehammer Axe, the Sisterhood Gauntlets, and the Astral Cord Bow. We are aware that more weapons are on the way, and I'm actually really excited to see what's coming next. Now, as I mentioned before, each of these weapons has its own moveset, and as a response, its own combos as well. You'll honestly be able to go hog wild on your enemies once you start getting a hang of what you're doing, and it feels ever so satisfying. From comboing enemies off the wall with the Battlehammer Axe with its meaty heavy attacks, to quick combo strings of the Sisterhood Gauntlets, to the surprisingly swift striking combos of the Astral Cord Bow. It feels like my limitations are coming from only myself as the player. Hell, once you break their armor or their armor drops, you can combo bosses. Each weapon plays quite differently from one another, and it's satisfying to play, providing an experience that is the equivalent of just playing an entirely new character. And once you slap on the Primal Beast's blessings, you'll continuously get stronger as you continue to progress during your run. And due to the design of the game, you'll not only get better as you unlock permanent upgrades and blessings during your run, but you'll get stronger as you gain mastery and control of the individual weapons and movement tech, making your progression as a player more rewarding. With your newfound skills though, you'll be traversing through 3 levels, each with their own visual themes, enemies, and bosses. The first stage has you going through the outskirts, fighting bioflies, dune hoppers, slab rollers, and shield scorpions. This stage also has you take on the enduring sentry, who will strike hard with her sword swipes and keep you moving with her aerial strikes, ground eruptions, and barrage of falling swords. The second stage finds you traversing through the Viridian trails, fighting shroom biters, thorn apes, spear beaks, bark spinners, rose warriors, boombug hosts, ronin shrooms, and the bosses of the Dark Trinity. A trio of bosses, each with their own attacks that grow stronger and attack faster as they lose their allies. If you aren't careful, you'll for sure find yourself getting overwhelmed. The third stage leaves you making your way through the caves, taking on spore sluggers, shroom puffers, slash shells, swarmies, and crystal rock walkers. After making your way through to the boss, you'll find yourself challenged by the Heretic Warlock, who will try to overwhelm you with his projectiles as his giant skeletal puppet tries to smash you to pieces. And each of these enemies I just listed also has their own elite variants that you can run across. In each level, you'll be given a branching map, where you'll take on different arenas of enemies and later different shrines. Upon completing these arenas, you'll be granted some sort of reward, such as relics that grant you passive bonuses and stats, dust, the game's currency, and shops to spend said dust, resources for unlocking new permanent upgrades, and weapons back in the shrine, or blessings from the divine beasts and upgrade shards. When it comes to those blessings, there are currently a total of 6 divine beasts with their own unique blessings to give you. Sharbara, Kellerman, Solish, Navalik, Mishfed, and Yamphis are the divine beasts you'll have the pleasure of accepting their power, each that provides something different from one another. For example, Sharbara is more focused on granting you damage reduction, as well as poise to your attacks to make them uninterruptible, while Navalik is all about granting you speed in the form of movement speed and attack speed to allow you to swiftly move about the battlefield and strike quick. Mixing and matching these blessings from the different divine beasts feels great as you find new ways to make yourself even stronger with each new blessing. and depending on your weapon and how you want to play them, you may take different paths to grab different blessings that you may prefer. I personally love Navalik, Sharbara, and Kellerman blessings while running the Sisterhood Gauntlet, and will typically prioritize pathing for those. But while running the Battlehammer Axe, I like to use Yamphis, Sharbara, and Mishvet to get some heavy hitting strikes and wall splats, and will prioritize those. Now, aside from these combat arenas you'll be going to, on occasion you'll find hidden rifts will on occasion appear during your run, and will grant you a chance to take on their challenge to receive rewards based on how you perform during its time limit. What is the challenge, you may be asking? Well, you'll be tasked with fighting one of 3 Blightborn creatures, with the only way to defeat them by knocking them into the raging fires on the edge of the screen. Hitting the enemy will progressively make them easier to knock back, and of course, they will try and fight back and try to recover back to the stage as best as they can. Knocking them off the stage will grant you one of 3 awards, and successfully doing so 3 times in the time limit will grant you all 3. Some, or maybe most of you have already caught on to the fact that these hidden rifts are basically an homage to the traditional platform fighters such as Brawlhalla or Smash Brothers, and are fun to complete and sometimes challenging when you can't catch up or get a hold of them. But just showing up and demolishing them with the equivalent of a 3-stock feels so good. Now, although this game has become one of my top favorite roguelikes, I do have one suggestion for the game as well as a few hopes for the future. I think the game has a decent difficulty curve and mastery, but when it comes to actual variety from run to run, I can see the game losing a bit of its luster and feeling samey. The only real shakeup is the hidden rifts and the elite enemy varieties. The depth of the game comes more from mastering the game's movement and weapons, and that's great, but as it stands now, the game feels lacking in that department. I fully understand that the game is in early access, and with content patches planned every month, I'm sure this issue of mine will be rectified. There are plans for additional weapons, new regions and bosses, and new divine beasts, but alongside that, I'd love to see little variants in the types of rooms you encounter. They may save that kind of thing for a sort of endgame system, but I do think it's something that definitely should be at least looked at and to provide more run variety and add that extra bit of replayability I think the game will need. How they do handle the endgame will be what makes or breaks this game, because at the end of the day for roguelikes, you gotta keep players coming back once the credits roll. But it feels as though Spiritfall might be one of the cases where the gameplay might be able to make up for that lack of variance until that endgame gets rolling around. There are also a few bugs that I had run into, such as enemies clipping into the walls, making them unkillable, and the third boss fight not triggering the transition to the next stage. But the game is in early access, and the devs have been working diligently to squash as many bugs as they can and when they come up. There's an amazing foundation here for an amazing roguelike, and I love the potential this game has. And based on how the devs are interacting with their community in Discord and how they feel to be directly listening to player feedback, makes me extremely hopeful for the future of this game, and I will absolutely be looking forward to venturing even further into the brink. In fact, if you got this far into the video, you're a real one, and I think Gentle Giant thinks so too for showing interest in their game. So thanks to Gentle Giant, we'll be giving away a free copy of the game so that you too can have a chance to venture into the brink. To participate in this giveaway, all you have to do is fill out the Google Forms document in the description, and like and subscribe too, if you want, no biggie. The winner will be chosen on April 17th and announced on my Twitter page and YouTube community posts. You all watching have been amazing, and I wanted to do something to give back to you guys, besides just making content. And thank you again to Gentle Giant for giving me a chance to play and talk about what is now one of my favorite new roguelikes. Spiritfall is amazing. Alrighty, the Lunasis video is finally done and dusted. What's up next on the schedule?
You have a new roguelike video to do.
Oh yeah, the one covering the updates for Have a Nice Death and Deflector.
Correct. Shall I pull up your script for the video?
Yeah, go ahead. Huh? Barry, I'll be honest, you're not making a lick of sense. Huh. What games did I wind up talking about?
I agree with Barry. That idea sounds as if it would have poor results.
But I did.
We are all in agreeance.
Fine. Well, since we can't figure anything out, I'm calling someone for help.
Who are you going to call?
Hey, can you come over and help me with something? It's Zoh. Zoh? Remember we traveled through universes together? Yeah, that Zoh. Great, I'll see you then. Alright, my friend is on the way.
How long until they arrive?
I don't know, like 30 minutes or so?
Will we remember that they are on the way?
Oh shit.